All right, good. So how many people have heard of the 4 R's? Everybody's heard of it? How many are practicing the 4 R's? Okay, good. So I've been working in soil fertility for too long, and I just retired October 1st. So this will probably be my last talk, which is probably a good thing for me. Hopefully not for you. Hopefully it's better for you. Might as well. So I did put up the 5 R's there. And actually we're going to talk a fair amount towards the end about the 5 R's, which actually is built right into the 4R program. They call it adaptive management. But everybody ignores that part. But I think it's the most important part of the 4 R's. So we'll get started. One of these. You have to turn this on. There we go. There we go. So I'm going to talk about 4R history just a little bit so you know where it came from. Okay. 4R nutrient recommendations, which are really land-grant university recommendations. And then why we need this 5th R, which in the Midwest, I work a lot in the Corn Belt. Even though I'm from Connecticut, I have a lot of projects out the Corn Belt, have for the past 20 years, mostly Ohio through Iowa and all the Corn Belt states there, main states. They call it the 5th R. The consultants I work with out there, and I work with a lot of them, they always call it the 5th R. We need that 5th R, which is the data, which is adaptive management in the 4R manual. So choosing the best combination of 4 R's can be extremely difficult. And that's the biggest problem with the 4R program. And they note that in the manual that you need adaptive management. I'm going to talk at the end about how you might be able to use the 4 R's to band together to get a good data set for the combination of the 4 R's that are best for the Chesapeake Bay. Okay. Here's the definitions that are right from the original 4R talk that was given by IPNI Terry Roberts. And originally I put the nutrient there. You can see him. I think you all know him. I put the nutrients in parentheses because originally this started out as a fertilizer program. And then later on it evolved into a total nutrient stewardship program. Okay. Why 4R concept? Why did they come out about this? So IPNI, everybody know who IPNI is, or most people do, International Plant Nutrition Institute. Unfortunately, they're now defunct, but they're the ones that started this. And it was way back in 2007. And you can see what Terry Roberts said up there in 2007 at a meeting in Paris of the International Fertilizer Association. They wanted to gain the public confidence. The fertilizer industry, even to this day, takes it on the chin oftentimes about recommending too many nutrients. And the main reason for this 4R program was to try to get a framework for best management practices that the fertilizer industry could promote so that they could show that they're good stewards. That's really what it comes down to. So, and they wanted to have a global framework. They didn't just want to have it for North America. They wanted it to be global because IPNI was global. They were across numerous countries. So, and this is Paul Fixon. How many people know Paul Fixon? A few people do. He's an excellent scientist. He originated at South Dakota State University as a professor, and then he switched to IPNI for about 20 years, 25 years maybe. And he wanted these principles to serve as a guide to practices with the highest probability of accomplishing the objectives. The objectives of fertilizer management are the 4 R's. And so that's the background. That's how they started, and that was in 2007. And they came up 2012 with this manual, which many of you maybe have seen. You can still purchase. So when IPNI went away, TFI, the Fertilizer Institute, they took over the program. You can still order this manual for $30. It's available online. I actually like the pocket guide. They have a separate little pocket guide, which is a little nicer. Has like 80% of the material of the big manual you can put in your pocket. So if you want to get the pocket guide, it'd be a good idea. It has a lot of information, a lot of good examples of each of the 4 R's. So this is their logo now and their information for our Nutrient Stewardship program for the Fertilizer Institute. I just downloaded their logos, and that's who's running it now. It's more than the 4 R's, just a little advertisement. Most people only talk about the 4 R's in terms of nutrient management, but if you look at all their literature, they also include soil conservation and cropping systems management. I've heard this referred to as 4 R's plus in the past. Okay. This was in a paper just recently by Tom Bilsema in 2019 where he expanded a little more on the 4 R's. Okay. So what are the 4 R's in the nutrient recommendations that we have? What used to be called fertility recommendations when I first studied soil fertility, and then we changed to nutrient recommendations. The examples are split applications of nitrogen. So that's your timing. Banding placement, nitrogen adjustment for yields, example for rate, nitrogen stabilizers would be a use of a product. Okay. And so I'm assuming you're all familiar with these. Do any of you do split applications of nitrogen with your customers? How many people use stabilized nitrogen here? Fair number use stabilized nitrogen. Yeah. So those are all the 4 R's. And the science-based principles, Fixon in particular, was really adamant that they wanted to have this based all on science. And this table was in the 4R manual. I'm just going to go over a little bit of the information. What they do is they have a separate chapter on each of the 4Rs in the 4R management guide or manual. And I'm just going to pick out some of the highlights, see their thinking, the science behind it. I broke this table down to the right source. You supply nutrients in available forms. The extreme of this would be rock phosphate. Organic growers oftentimes want to use rock phosphate. Well, it's probably not going to be available, at least not in my lifetime. But if you use triple superphosphate, it will be rapidly available. So that's a good example. So physical and chemical properties, don't put urea on a hayfield on the surface, unless you got a prediction of rain maybe in the next 12, 24 hours or so. So recognize benefits of associated elements. You got 15% calcium in triple superphosphate. So you get a fair amount of calcium in there. You got a lot of micronutrients in manure. So these are the type of things for the right source that have principles of science behind them. And you can point to papers, published papers. As for the right rate, this one, I talked about this last year here. I talk about it too much. I'm going to stop talking about it. It's been 30 years. We still can't get enough data to really know how to predict nitrogen. We've been using the yield goal forever. The entire Corn Belt stopped using it back in 2005. I'm still using it at the University of Connecticut. All the recommendations of the University of Connecticut have my name on it. We use yield goal. Unfortunately, I know that every recommendation that goes out the door for nitrogen is incorrect. I don't have any other way to do it right now until I could build a data set to get more information on how to predict it better. So that's what we're stuck with. Why are we stuck with this outdated principle, and what is so complicated about it? Well, let's just look at the data that shows it's outdated first. I showed a few of these graphs last year. This is just 27 experiments. In Iowa, this was done. They put the observed optimal rate of nitrogen. They actually had 7 rates of nitrogen from 0 to 300 pounds of N. The experiments were replicated 3 times. And this is over 2 years. And you see the recommendation, Iowa State University's recommendation for yield goal. They don't line up. In particular, if you look at these down at the bottom, the observed optimal N rate for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sites was 0. The Iowa State algorithm using yield goal recommended 125, 160, and around 200. And all these points are below the line. So that means in this case, for soybeans in particular, the Iowa State algorithm for using yield goal to predict how much nitrogen you need on these fields was recommending too much nitrogen on almost every field. The only ones that were predicting accurately are the ones that are close to the line there. And this is the kind of data that caused the Corn Belt scientists, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, form a consortium and decide to go away from yield goal. and they don't use Yogol. I'm not going to go into the system they use now, but they don't use it. And they had a database that they could use to make a different prediction, which is what they're using. And this is another data set. This is actually all across the Corn Belt. You can get this online. This isn't a special data set in that sense. It's available on the Iowa State Calculator, nitrogen MRTN calculator data set. This just shows the yield at economic optimum. Each one of these points is a trial. I think there's over 1,000 trials here across the Corn Belt. So this isn't a trivial data set. This is a heck of a lot of money, a heck of a lot of time. It was over, I think, 10, 15 years. I don't have all the information on that metadata, but you can see, so each of these is a location where they calculate the economic optimum nitrogen rate, a yield at the economic optimum nitrogen rate, and the economic optimum rate. And you can see there's no relationship. As the yield goes up, the nitrogen rate stays pretty flat. And this is the other data set that caused them to move away from Yogol. Okay? And you can see the yields are actually very good. This is in megagrams per hectare, but I put in 160 bushels per acre. It's 10 megagrams per hectare or so. You see most of them are above that. I think it's interesting, the ones over on that I circled over on the zero axes, they run from 100 bushel to 240 bushel, and they all required zero nitrogen. So how do you find those sites? I'm certain the farmer would really like to know, if that was their site, how to predict ahead of time. This is post hoc. It's real easy then. So these are the kind of data that clearly show that we can't predict nitrogen rates very well using Yogol. Okay, and there's many reasons for that. I'm not so sure we have any good method to predict. But Yogol doesn't work very well. And it doesn't work really well because if you go back to the scientific principles in Fixon's article, use adequate methods to assess soil nutrient status. We can do that pretty well. Maybe you could use a PSNT test for nitrogen. For phosphorus, actually, and potassium, we have better tests. So you can do a pretty good job there. You can do response experiments. Of course, the response experiments I showed you 2 slides ago from Iowa show very clearly that Yogol doesn't work very well. So if you're using scientific principles, you'd have to move away from Yogol based on that data set. But more of a problem is predict fertilizer use efficiency. You need to estimate the amount that will be lost is what that's saying. So what's that also saying? Well, that's saying that when you apply that fertilizer, the time you apply that fertilizer, the rate, you're going to have to put some type of fudge factor in there. We call it insurance nitrogen. Because you don't know how much rainfall is going to occur over the next 3 months or so of the season. So until we can predict the intensity and the amount of rainfall, because they both have an effect, and the frequency of that rainfall, going out 3 months, we're never going to be able to predict real accurately. It's impossible. Can't do it, given today's tools. So that's one of the reasons we have such a problem with nitrogen. That's one of the reasons Yogol doesn't work very well. The other reason is consider rate-specific economics. You need to assess the probability of attaining that economic optimum rate. And that's where we get insurance nitrogen. You have to put insurance nitrogen down because you don't know if you're going to get a 4-inch rainstorm on August 1st and have all that nitrogen washed out. You might go a relatively dry year and not have any leaching, and then you end up with a lot of extra nitrogen in the fall. And that's why it's a really good idea to put a cover crop in there, so that you can take up that extra nitrogen that you had to put down from an economic standpoint to ensure against rainstorms that you didn't know whether they're going to come or not. That's the system you're operating in. You can't change that. That's biology of the system you're operating in. And what we've done as a society, we've overlaid this economic system, a very competitive economic system, and we have a commodity that's at a really low price, and we're forcing the farmers to try to make a living within that economic system on top of this biological system that's high variability. And it's extremely difficult to do. And you can see the results of that economic system forcing the farmers to make the decisions they typically make. Well, they're going to have to put insurance nitrogen down if they want to stay in business. Some years that insurance nitrogen is such a great amount, a large amount goes into Chesapeake Bay or Long Island Sound or wherever, and ends up causing environmental problems. That's the system we're working in. We're not going to change that. So how do scientists come up with information that's going to help you do a better job? And that's what I'm going to talk about some more. The right time, we'll get back to that. I'll talk about the bigger picture a little bit. Right time, scientific principles. Assess timing of plant uptake. And when is the greatest demand by plant? Well, corn and wheat is a good example. Corn's taking up most of its nitrogen July and August. June, July, August, depending upon when you plant it. Wheat, different. It's going to take it up at a different time of year. Assess dynamics of soil nutrient supply. That's why we top dress winter wheat in typically February or so. The soil's not supplying any. One thing nice about corn, in a sense, is at least it starts having its peak demand about the time the soil's starting to produce a fair amount of nitrogen, or at least near the time. When you get all that mineralization in May and June, when the microbes wake up from the winter, and you get a lot of nitrate produced from mineralization, at least there's some synchrony there with corn. With wheat, no. With winter wheat, no. Yeah. And recognize the dynamics of soil nutrient loss. When is it likely to have high rainfall? Especially when the soil's already wetted up. Well, when are the soils typically wet? They're wet when plants aren't growing there. Not as wet in say, the corn season, because the plants are transpiring. And it takes a lot less water to leach nitrogen to get denitrification when you have rainfall on a wet soil. You have a lot less rainfall. And then you get these big storm fronts that come through on the East Coast, hurricanes, that dump 4, 5, 6 inches of rain. Well, that's just like flushing the toilet in the fall. So you don't want to have much nitrogen, you don't want to have much soluble nitrate out there in the field in September, October, November. The biology of the system says that's when it's going to leach. The scientific data is clear. There's probably 20, 30 papers probably showing that. So that's another principle. It's really important. And then high aluminum soils, apply phosphorus close to the time of plant uptake. I had a farmer this year that had a vegetable farmer that had what looked to be, and we're pretty sure it was based on test, he had phosphorus deficiency. And he said to me, well, he said, this was Renland he just picked up. He said, well, in September, I put down 150 pounds of P2O5. And here it was July, and he's getting these deficiencies. I said, well, you know, the soil test shows that you have real high aluminum in these soils. And your pH is down around 5.6, 5.7, because it was Renland. He hadn't had time to get the pH up. I said, what I think happened is all that phosphorus precipitated as aluminum phosphate because it was out there so long. It was out there from September. If you'd put it down in May, probably would still be there, some of it. So all these factors go into these 4 R's. The right place. Consider where the plant roots are going. The good example in the manual, I thought it was a good one, is this picture here showing corn at 36 days type of root, sugar beet 2 months old. You're obviously going to fertilize completely different for phosphorus with those type of root systems. This gets away from corn and beans, gets into vegetable crops. You got to think a lot different when you start dealing with the vegetable crops and the root systems they have. Consider soil chemical reactions, banding P to reduce precipitation. Another way to get around the precipitation problem of phosphorus, band it. Suit the goals of the tillage system. We talk about this a lot, especially when you start talking about soil conservation. You get subsurface placement techniques that maintain that crop residue. The difference between injection versus disking in of phosphorus or potassium or nitrogen. If you inject, you leave all that residue. If you're going to disc it in, you lose it. So all these factors. And they talk more about soil conservation practices in the manual. I'm not going to go into those. So how decide an optimum set? That is always the big question. The consultants I work with out in the Corn Belt, that was always their big question. Actually, IPNI took it on the chin for a few years. Let everybody, that's just crap, 4 R's. We all know that. But I actually think it's a very good framework for have discussions. Not just discussions with your clients, but discussions with citizens. It's a real simple framework. And you're going to have to be involved with citizenry because they are demanding clean water. And obviously the system that we're working in, given the biology and the economic system we're working in, they ain't going to get clean water for a while. So they have to understand the problem. And maybe then you'll be able to provide some more subsidies so that we can start solving the problem. Because forget the price of food going up. It ain't going up. It doesn't happen. So where else are you going to get the money to do the system better? It has to come from tax dollars. There's no choice. So it's probably impossible without adaptive management, the evaluations of combinations of the 4 R's across many fields. You're going to have to do some type of evaluations, assessments. It's the only way to do it. Otherwise, you're guessing. Adaptive management. The 4R Concepts has 2 chapters on adaptive management. I've never seen them discussed except by IP&I whenever I see a talk on the 4Rs. This is a definition of the 4Rs that they have in there. It comes from the USDA committee that defined the 4Rs for nutrient management. It's in chapters 2 and 7. I want to focus on the continuous systematic assessment, okay? And that's really important. The continuous is hard to do because it's hard to get funding, but some type of systematic assessment would be a real good idea, at least for a few years. So systematic assessments. Yield monitors and variable rate applicators make those assessments relatively easy, relatively inexpensive. As I gather from talking to people since I've been here since yesterday, I've been going around asking if very many people, fertilizer dealers, extension, farmers, large farmers in particular usually, how many are doing any type of yield monitors where they're doing any comparisons in their fields? Not yield, yeah, some are? Good. I haven't found too many. There doesn't seem to be near the number in the Corn Belt, or even doing some type of replicated strip trials to get some information about their operation, about what practice might be good for their particular operation. It doesn't seem to be here. The base knowledge doesn't seem to be very widespread anyway. I think you're going to have to develop that. I think the combines and the variable spreading, all the whole technology package is relatively easy now. 5-10 years ago, it was actually a little trickier, a lot trickier. And you can hire consultants that have packages for you. It's a lot easier. So you're going to have to do field skill trials to get these realistic assessments of the 4Rs. If you're a large enough farmer, some of them do it on their own, I really think Extension and the whole ag community needs to join together to start building a database using these new tools. There's no other way around it. You can keep improving by doing that. And then you can help with the water quality quite a bit. And also you can also be part of the solution rather than being viewed as part of the problem, especially the fertilizer dealers. If the fertilizer dealers, I think, and I've worked a lot. I worked with Land O'Lakes, I worked with United Suppliers. I was in on helping to establish the Sustain program in Land O'Lakes. I was a consultant on that for a long time, right from the beginning. And I understand the mentality of the fertilizer dealers and the way they take it on the chin. But they're going to have to get behind, I think they have to get behind the 4Rs and join with other ag organizations in order to collect this data set so they can be seen as the solution rather than the problem. They're still being seen as a problem in too many ways. So what we do have for the 4Rs, the information you guys are using for the 4Rs, the way you are making your decisions are all based on small data sets and small plot trials, plus all the background information about your farm that you have, okay? Which of course I never get when I make a recommendation. So my recommendation from the University of Connecticut, what information do I get from you? You being a farmer or a consultant. I get yield goal, I get the manure rate, and sometimes I get the soil type. That's about it. How does that, it makes it pretty hard for me to really make an accurate nitrogen recommendation because I don't have all the background information about that field that you carried in your head. So that's really important information. And I think if scientists can provide the farmers with the correct information more than we're giving them now, they can take the information we provide, which I'll show you in a little bit, and the farmers can add their information to the scientific information, make better decisions. So the 4R manual is very clear. We need to have adaptive management. We need to figure out what is the best combination of 4Rs for a particular ecosystem, soils, cropping system, the whole system. And this is a diagram from their manual. And this is part of one. The part of the diagram, there's more parts to it above, which I'll show later. This is just on the adaptive management. And what they're showing here is evaluation of the outcome. That's adaptive management. That's systematic assessment. And then it goes around to the farm, to the producers and crop advisors. And they make a decision whether they're going to accept, revise, or reject that information. They may say that information isn't good enough. I'm going to stick with my current program. And then they may or may not change. They evaluate again. That's the idea of continuous systematic assessment. And that's the adaptive management. And the local site factors that they list, all the factors that are going to make effect on this. And I think it's interesting that you have things such as land tenure included. It's not solely about the science. It's about the sociology also. So what combination of 4Rs is most appropriate for the Bay Area, for the Chesapeake Bay Area? I think you're going to need to create a database that you're going to put it in terms of probabilities. I know a lot of people don't like the probability idea, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. And you need to get the effectiveness of the typically used, commonly used combinations of 4Rs, find out what are the best for your area here. And here's some assessments that I could think of. I have no idea what questions you would want to ask. And I'd put this in terms of probability. What's the probability that yields will be unchanged when lower rates of nitrogen are applied with split applied N? How many people reduce their nitrogen rate when they split apply the N compared to all pre-plant? Very many people here recommend a reduction of some sort. Anybody? When you split apply N? No? That's typical. The New England, all through New England, the Corn Belt, they typically do not reduce. The science says you should. That's why you're split applying it. So you're more efficient. If you're more efficient, by definition, that means you should need a lower rate, right? I mean, plus you want the expense of doing the split, so you just cost yourself more money. So that's typical. What if we had some data that showed you could cut back by a certain number of pounds? Then you could save a little money. Supposed to be less nitrogen. And also the other thing is, it always astounds me in some ways, is you go to the effort of doing the split, you apply the same rate as if you were pre-plant. We know that the split is more efficient, hence you're probably going to be polluting more. Right? You follow that logic? Yields will increase when starter P is abandoned on high testing soils. I get that question a lot still. Want to put down 20 pounds of P in my starter, no matter how, even if it tests 300, because they see better growth in the early season. Typically, you don't get a difference in yield. That's what the research data says. The farmers aren't believing it. So maybe we ought to ask that question. Maybe we ought to find out about that 4R with some field scale experiments. You can insert your own question. Those are ones that I'm familiar with. I have a little exercise for us. And actually, I think you already answered it. I was going to ask you, I was trying to find out the probability that farmers and consultants are, recommendations in the Chesapeake Bay are reduced when you do split rates of nitrogen. And I was going to ask people to raise their hands. How many do 0 pound reduction? So how many people do a 0 pound reduction if you split your nitrogen? Pretty much everybody. How many do a 10 pound reduction? Anybody do a 10 pound reduction? 20 pound? Well, some people do. Good, good, good. 30 pound? All right. Any other pounds? All right, so when I'm talking about probability, so now I'm thinking, all right, in the Chesapeake Bay, we got farmers convinced to do this really good practice, which is split apply the nitrogen because it's more efficient. Unfortunately, they're not reducing only, 2 out of, 60 people here. 2 out of 60 is what, 30? That's about 3%. So about 3% of the farmers, probably is we got a 3% increase in, 3% betterment of our nitrogen management now. Because I'd have to then find out how much extra nitrogen was lost because they split applied the N, it was more efficient, and they actually did reduce the rate, so now we lost more. So I'd have to go and figure out what's the probability that we actually had more pollution from implementing this 4R, which should be a better 4R. So here's one way, I have some graphs here. These are from trials that we've done mainly in the Maumee River Valley, Ohio and Indiana, about 3 million acres of corn and beans there. And this 179 field strip trials. We actually, I think, we haven't published this yet. We're holding on publishing. I think we're up to 260 some trials now because I want to have better probabilities. And I don't need the data. I don't need to get tenure. I don't need all that other crap, so I can just wait on it. So, yeah, there's all kinds of perverse incentives in all these systems. Anyway, these graphs are hard to read unless you're used to them, but what we're doing is we're taking first it was 4 rates of nitrogen, 4 reps, 16 strips in a field. The rates of nitrogen were 100 pounds, 150, 200, and 250 pounds of N, replicated 4 times. Most of them were a quarter mile long, some were a half mile long, some were only 1,000 feet long, depending on the field. Most were at least a quarter mile. Okay, 16 rows wide. Okay, so those are the experiments. Farmers harvested them with consultants helping them. Some of the farmers do it all on their own. Okay, and we take aerial images, all of them. We have quality control built in. There's always all those questions. I have a whole talk on that. But anyway, it's good data. So what we've done is we've converted this data into the probability of a response going from 100, changing from 100 to 150 pounds of nitrogen. What's the probability if I add that 50 pounds of nitrogen over 100 pounds? What's the probability I'm going to make money? That's what we're supposed to be doing. This is translated into words. I don't want to go into this exactly, but this is what the graphs look like. 59% chance of a positive return to nitrogen if rainfall is less than 10 inches. We're going from 100 to 150. 78% chance of positive returns if rainfall is greater than 10 inches. Well, why is it a greater percentage chance when you add that 50 pounds? Well, because you're losing some of it when it rains more than 10 inches. And that's the kind of information you can get from these large data sets. When we move to 150 to 200 pounds, and this isn't very expensive to collect. Once you have the people trained to do it, it's pretty simple to do. 150 to 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre, 42% chance. Now we have less. Our chance has been reduced. Okay? If it's less than 10. If it's greater than 10, you get a 63% chance. So there's still a pretty high probability. It's worthwhile to put that 50 pounds down. Yes? Oh, the average yields on these are pretty high. They're typically up around 220 bushel. Yeah. Forget yield goal, though. Right. Okay. Yeah, these yields are really high. These are good soils. Yeah. Now, the more interesting one is 200 to 250. A lot of guys put 220 pounds of N down in this area. It's pretty typical because they're getting 220 bushel. A lot of them actually think they're doing really good because they've reduced, they went from a 1.2 factor, remember with the yield goal factor 1.2, they're down at 1, or some of them are down at 0.8 or 0.9. They're trying to push that down. That's the way they think. They've been trained to think that way. And they're really working hard at it, and they're trying to do a really good job. But they still end up a lot of times putting down 220 pounds of N. And you only got a 16% chance of a positive return by putting that 50 pounds down from 200 to 250. And you only got a 17, you got no difference really if the rainfall doesn't affect it, because you already got too much down. Almost all the fields. There are some fields that we haven't figured out. There's some fields that get 280 bushel yield, and 300 bushel yield needed. Other fields get 280 bushel yield and only need 180 pounds or so. The question is how you figure that out. Well, we're not there yet, but at least we can start having a better conversation with this kind of data. And then you can make better decisions. One of the reasons we're holding back on publishing this data is because we want to build enough data sets so that we can divide not only by moisture, by rainfall. And this is rainfall in the spring. I didn't go into the details. This is up till, I can't remember what we used. June 1st, I think it is, or June 15th. You know, up to a certain date. So I think it was June 1st, so you could still go in top dress. You could use this as a tool to decide if you need to put that extra 50 pounds down. And you'd have some probabilities then. So, and you'd have the rainfall. So this is the kind of information you can get from these type of trials. And if we get more data, we can then subdivide it to the different sources or the different timings. Some of these guys doing different timings. Some are all doing preplant, and some are doing split. Some are using UAN, some are using anhydrous. Well, if we get enough data, we have enough points, we can start doing the probabilities that anhydrous is better than UAN at certain times of year. And actually, the data is coming pretty clear. Anhydrous is much more efficient than UAN. No question. Yeah, and we can put some numbers to it. Another way to look at this, those are a little more complicated. If you want to start out simply, you could do just two treatments. This is a great data set. This is not nutrients. This is headline on soybean, fungicide. Okay, this is Iowa soybean. They actually have a calculator. You can go calculate if you want to. I don't think this data would be real good for these conditions here, but it's interesting to go take a look. So they build a data set, 296 trials. They look at the cumulative probability of a benefit from putting headline on soybeans and use $13 beans, $17 cost of product. This gives you yield response. Those are hard to read unless you're used to it. Here's the numbers. So you get 1.3 bushel yield increase to break even. You're going to make $10.30 on average based on this data set, okay, if you use headline at those prices. And 5 years out of 5, on average, you're going to make money. So it's a no-brainer. You should do it. What if the price of beans goes to $7? And you can put this information, it's an interactive calculator. You can just put your numbers in there, and it'll give you this information. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to lose $2.30. Only 1 year out of 5, you're actually going to make money on average. This is the kind of information I think you're going to need in the future to make proper decisions, and also to explain to the rest of society about the fact that we're dealing with probabilities and nothing's absolute. We're going to have some losses. And here are the probabilities that we're going to have those losses. It's a lot better conversation. So, how do you do these field scale trials? Well, there's manuals. It's not that difficult. This is by Iowa Soybean Association. You can download this. I think it's free. They might have started charging for it. It's really good. We wrote one. I'm an author on this one here. Farmer Network Design Manual. This included not just how to do the trials, but more about how to analyze the data and how to have discussions about the data. Because we take this kind of data. This data just doesn't come to me. Every winter we meet with the farmers and discuss the data, what it means to them. So. Here's the other diagrams that the IPNI has in their manual. And you can see their vision for this was, see this regional level now? They've added, we had this before. Now regional level, agronomists, agronomic scientists, agri-service providers, that's all of us mostly, who aren't farmers. Decision support based on scientific principles, and then the output, which is the recommendation. So you're going to have this loop coming from down here, the data. There's going to be interpretation. There's going to be a design support system like I was just showing you. Except the one I envision is probabilities, interactive probabilities, where you go in and put your information and get probability back. So this is the logistics and science of it. This is the infrastructure and incentive. This the same graph again, except they've added a policy level, regulatory, infrastructure, and product development. They envision this as a whole system working together. And the whole ag community working together, not just the fertilizer dealers. And I really think that's where we need to go. And I am an extension. I've been extension for 27 years. And I really feel strongly that the IPN and I really got a good vision here. Paul Fixon was the main driver behind it. And I don't see anybody really implementing the fertilizer dealers extension. Actually, extension oftentimes is hostile to it because they say, oh, we're treading on my territory, all that kind of crap. But it's not going to work very well unless we all get together. And I think you have a good start. There is a 4N alliance here for our nutrient stewardship. They've just got started. It's a typical type of alliance, though, that I found when it's with fertilizer dealers. They typically don't reach out very far. I don't know all the reasons. Extension typically doesn't reach out as far as they should either, neither does NRCS. Right here in Chesapeake Bay, though, you have the best place to do this. You have more support here, more interest, more funds, more expertise, more skills to set something like this up. You know the reason there is the information coming out of the Maumee River Valley in Ohio and Indiana is mainly because of Brookside Laboratories. You know Brookside Laboratories and the Brookside Consultants? They're really big. Those consultants got together and decided they wanted better answers. And they implemented it on their own. So I think you need to include the Stewardship Association, the 4R nutrients, to include all of ag. Experience informs me that's going to be extremely difficult. I think the rewards would be great. Plus, you'd make Paul Fixon really happy. The reasons it's going to be very difficult. We all, in our own agencies, organizations, we all have our own incentives. Like I talked about earlier. I can hold back on publishing that data because I don't give a darn anymore. I'm retired. But I would make a lot more money if I took that paper and divided it into 5 papers, which I could do. Because my salary, my raise every year is based on how many papers I produce and how many grants I get. I've lost a few $1,000s by not publishing that a few years ago. Those are the kind of incentives that each organization has built in that makes it difficult for them to cooperate and go do something a little different. and that's in every organization. Fear of losing a funding source. Assumption of zero-sum funding. There's only so much pie to go around. We all got to grab it. It's never going to expand. Well, it will expand if you get together and make a good case for it. Because also, funding agencies have their own prejudices. They typically only want to fund the extension, or they don't want to fund whatever. They have their own little relationships. Well, if you can get everybody together, you can start expanding that pool of funds. Especially, I found this, especially if you get the environmental groups working with extension and industry. You get those three in particular together, a lot more money comes in. You have access to many more sources of money. So, and you need money. You can't do without it. And the other thing I see is no one agency has a dynamic person that has a job description to do this, to coordinate it. That seems to be the biggest problem. I do believe that every time we have differences, we need to come back to our goals. We all have the same goals. Joe homeowner with a lawnmower has the same goal. Everybody has the same goals. They're up there. They're black and white. So if we can keep coming back to those goals every time we have differences, we can continue the conversation. And you're going to hear next talk. How you doing back there? Dr. Ketterings is going to talk about her program in New York, about how they have a different version of adaptive management program than I've been discussing. And I went and hold my version to the best version. Adaptive management, the broad idea is you're going to go out and collect information to make a better decision. The information will be collected in some systematic way, so it's reliable. And they have a great program in New York. I recommend you listen to Dr. Ketterings 2 hours from now. So in summary, for my talk, benefits are going to be fully implemented to the 4R program. Would be great if you get a true 4R program going. Challenge is going to be difficult. The technology is there. It's the people side that we need to work on. I really think you have the opportunity here, especially now with the technology and the funding sources and the expertise, to do something like this. That's all I have. I'll be glad to take questions. Actually, happy to take questions. Yes, sir.
Back on your split-in nitrogen reduction, now, but your average is probably going to fall on that 220, 230 on our soil. Yeah. I'm talking dry land irrigation.
Yeah.
It's going to be a little better.
Yeah.
Have you found a cap in your?
Yeah. So the question is, this gentleman here is seeing a cap on the yields, no matter how much, really not just nitrogen, probably how much management you give it, of maybe 250 bushel. And yes, I agree, there is a cap. It's based on the genetics and the ecosystem you're in. They can hit in the Maumee River Valley, Ohio and Indiana, there on the drained land, because that used to be swamp. If it's not drained, you don't get much. It's too wet. It's just the opposite. They can, in a really good year, what was it year? I think it was 2014 maybe. We had a lot of plots go 300 bushel, but that was unusual. Those same fields typically go 250 maybe. Everything was perfect. Yeah. Weather was perfect. You got in planting on just right time. Everything was perfect. Growing deguriers were good. Yeah. Disease didn't come in, everything. But that's genetics and the system you're in. Yeah. So. But I'd like to ask you, and go ahead and ask any other questions, be fine, but I have a question for the audience again. So I never get to ask questions when I'm up here usually. Why did I ask you how many pounds of nitrogen you'd reduce by when you split? And that was really interesting to me. And it actually, it fits with every other talk I've given on this. Every audience is pretty much the same way. And I've never quite understood it. I hope that little exercise makes you just think a little differently. That's the purpose of me being here. But does anybody have an opinion here on what the odds, let's put it that way so you can answer the question. What the odds are of getting a coalition of fertilizer dealers, extension, environmental groups, whether it be TNC or whoever it is, there's other environmental groups, and maybe even some citizens, concerned citizens, together to try to create a network, call it what you like, to start collecting this kind of data. Any of you have any Let me see. What are the odds? That's okay. I'll make it so you answer it. What are the odds that you think a coalition like that can get together at 60% chance? Raise your hand if you think it's 60% chance that can get together. Anybody? All right. How about a 30% chance that that might happen in the next 5 years? Let me define the next 5 years. Some people. Well, that's actually pretty good. 30% actually pretty good for something like that. Yeah. What's that?
The interest.
Yeah.
That people are interested in.
Yeah. Well, you people have to be interested. Oh, yeah.
And the integrity of those separate groups.
Yeah, the other gentleman says, yeah, integrity. Yeah, actually, sir, I consulted with Environmental Defense Fund on numerous projects. That's how I got involved with United Suppliers and with Land O'Lakes and the Sustain program. I was their expert. And the reason Environmental Defense Fund was invited in by United Suppliers, which is where that program first started, and then Land O'Lakes bought United Suppliers because they liked the program. That's how that all went about. Environmental Defense Fund was asked to come in just for that reason, because the fertilizer dealers would not have integrity, or they knew that they couldn't sell it as being a sustainable program unless they had some stamp of approval from some well-known national environmental organization. That's why you have to have the environmental organizations. Otherwise, they're going to be out there throwing stones at you saying, no, we don't believe it because it's only you doing it, you being the fertilizer dealers, or you being the farmers, or you being the extension. See what I mean? That's the way the game works.
The other way around here.
It goes any way you want. It goes any way you want, and it's all the same. It's all. We're all stuck in our own little boxes. We all have our own viewpoints. Yeah. But thanks. I'm really glad to hear that some people, a fair number of people raise their hand at 30%. So that's all I have to say. I'm glad to be here, and good luck, guys.